If you trade your leftovers for a miracle, would you dare?" The voice was soft, almost musical, but it sliced through the midnight hush of the Stone estate like a blade. Victoria Stone blinked awake in the half-light, fingers tightening on the velvet armrest of her custom wheelchair. A boy, 7, maybe 8, stood in her doorway, framed by a sliver of gold light from the hall. "Who said that?" Her voice came out rough, startled. "I did." He stepped inside, sneakers silent on the polished marble. His skin glowed against the shadows, his eyes wide but steady. "I'm Devon Cole. My dad cleans your floors." He held up a dented metal lunchbox. "If you give me whatever food you don't want, I can help you walk again." Victoria stared, caught between irritation and a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: curiosity. "That's absurd," she snapped, but her fingers trembled on the wheels. Devon didn't flinch. "It isn't. My dad says kindness makes doors open, maybe even legs." Lightning flickered beyond the windows, illuminating the hallway behind him. An abandoned mop, wet tracks across the stone, a storm pressing against the glass. He looked far too small for this room, yet every word landed with quiet certainty. "Where's your father?" "Downstairs, finishing the lobby," Devon said. "He doesn't know I came. He'd tell me not to bother you." The smell of rain drifted in with him, mingling with the sterile scent of moneyed loneliness. Victoria's pulse kicked hard. No one walked into her life without permission, not since the accident stole her spine and her sense of safety. "You shouldn't be here." "Maybe." Devon placed the lunchbox on her nightstand. "But miracles don't knock twice." He tilted his head toward her motionless legs, then back to her face, waiting. For a heartbeat, the room felt alive, the storm rattling the glass, her heart thudding, his gaze locked on hers. Something old and brittle inside her shifted, just a fraction. And before she could summon a command or call security, she heard herself whisper, "What exactly are you offering, kid?" Devon smiled, quick and bright. "Hope," he said, "and maybe your first step." Victoria wheeled closer to the window, the storm outside sharpening every edge of the night. Snow swirled across the manicured lawn, piling against iron gates that once welcomed a parade of guests. Now they stood like guards over an empty kingdom. Her gaze caught her own reflection, silver hair swept back, a face carved by discipline more than warmth. 20 years of empire building, of flying to Hong Kong on Monday and closing deals in Chicago by Friday, had ended with one reckless ski trip in Aspen. One slip, one tree, and a lifetime of movement ripped away. A photograph on the sill winked in the dim light. Her younger self in a crimson coat, hand in hand with Marcus, the man who taught her to dance at jazz lounges in Harlem, who believed in risk as a language of love. He'd been gone since the avalanche, buried while rescuing a stranger. She touched the frame, fingers tracing their frozen smiles. "You always said I moved too fast," she murmured, the words nearly lost under the wind's howl. From the corridor came a faint echo. Devon's sneakers retreating, a quiet defiance against rules written for richer, safer people. It landed heavier than she expected. The boy's eyes had carried something, stubborn, hopeful, the same look Marcus wore when he built community programs for black kids downtown, even as investors rolled their eyes. Victoria exhaled, sharp and thin. She hated that a janitor's son had cracked the armor she'd forged through rehab, lawsuits, and 1,000 empty charity galas. Yet part of her, long buried under money and fear, leaned toward the sound of small feet fading down her hall. The snow kept falling, relentless, as if daring her to open the door she'd slammed on the world. Darius Cole worked the mop in long, steady strokes, the marble floor gleaming under soft chandeliers. The scent of lemon polish cut through the hush of the mansion, chasing away the winter damp that clung to his jacket. He straightened, wiped his brow with a folded handkerchief, and glanced toward the sweeping staircase. "Devon," he called, voice low but firm. "Remember what I told you. Stay off those stairs. We keep to the service halls, not the private floors." From behind a column, Devon peeked out, eyes too bright for midnight. I wasn't doing anything, he said, trying for innocence. Darius gave him a look every black father knows, steady, protective, edged with quiet warning. This isn't home, son. Folks up there don't always see us as people, just help. You get me? Devon nodded, but his sneakers shifted against the stone, betraying the pull of curiosity. Darius sighed, leaning on the mop handle. He'd taken this job because the pay was solid, and the estate came with a small apartment, 2 rooms, a heater that worked most nights. After the divorce and the bank breathing down his neck about late payments, it was the only way to keep Devon in a decent school. He was determined not to let hardship steal the boy's pride. A faint creak drifted from above. Darius froze, eyes narrowing toward the corridor that led to Victoria Stone's wing. Devon swallowed, suddenly fascinated by his own shoes. Tell me you didn't, Darius said quietly. I just asked if she had leftovers, Devon blurted, words tumbling out. Darius closed his eyes, a muscle ticking in his jaw. One slip, and everything they'd built, steady work, a roof, respect hard-won, could vanish. He set the mop aside and crouched, hands firm on Devon's shoulders. We survive by knowing where we stand. You can't run into rooms where power lives and expect grace every time. Devon nodded, chastened, but unbowed, the storm's glow flickering in his gaze. Upstairs, a light moved across the landing, proof the line between chance and trouble had already been crossed. Victoria kept her hands on the wheel rims, still unsure whether to roll forward or call security. Devon stood firm, shoulders squared like a boy trying to wear a man's courage. What makes you think you can fix what doctors can't? She asked, voice edged but softer than before. Devon looked down, then back up with quiet certainty. My mama used to say kindness can heal, he said. The word mama slipped out before he caught himself. I mean, my dad says it too. If somebody's hurting, you help, even if you don't know how yet. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Kindness won't knit spinal nerves. Maybe not, Devon admitted, but it can make a person want to live again, and that's when things start working. The boy's tone, steady, not begging, pressed against her armor in a way boardrooms and specialists never had. She turned toward the tray on her nightstand, a few biscuits from an untouched tea service. You came in here at midnight for cookies and philosophy? Devon grinned, sheepish but unafraid. Mostly cookies. He hesitated. But also, you look lonely. Something in the remark hit deep, the way an old gospel lyric sneaks past reason. She slid the plate toward him. Sit before you faint. Devon perched on the velvet ottoman, careful not to brush the silk coverlet. He bit into a biscuit, eyes scanning the room's cold elegance, the portraits, the silver-framed photo of Victoria and Marcus. My daddy says storms can't last forever, Devon murmured, crumb clinging to his lip. But you gotta open the door when the sun comes. Victoria let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The boy's words sounded like something her late husband once whispered after a hard deal. For the first time in years, the room felt less like a vault and more like a place where light might sneak in. Devon wiped the crumbs from his fingers, then reached into the pocket of his worn hoodie. When he pulled his hand out, a tiny wild daisy rested in his palm, its stem bent but stubbornly alive. I picked this outside before the snow got too heavy, he said, voice low. Thought your room needed something real. Victoria frowned at the little flower, caught off guard. Her bedroom was a gallery of order, sterile whites, curated art, chrome rails. The daisy didn't belong, and somehow that made it shine brighter. He stepped closer, moving with the caution of a kid who understood expensive things could bite back. Gently, he set the flower near her pillow. That's your token? She asked. Devon nodded. Where I'm from, folks bring something small when they visit. Pie, a hymn, a hug. Shows you came in peace. A laugh slipped from her, quick and surprised. You're 7 going on 70. Daddy says I listen too hard, Devon answered, shrugging. His gaze dropped to her legs, hidden beneath the cashmere blanket. Can I? He stopped, watching her face for permission. She hesitated. Every doctor had touched those legs, cold hands, clinical voices, but no one had asked with such gravity. She gave the faintest nod. Devon reached out, fingers light as breath, and laid them just above her knee. The warmth of his skin seeped through the blanket. Victoria felt something, an almost electric tremor, not pain but the faintest spark, traveling up through years of numbness. Her breath caught. What was that? Maybe hope, Devon said, matter of fact. He withdrew his hand and looked straight at her, calm despite the storm rattling the window panes. For a heartbeat, the house wasn't marble and shadows anymore. It felt like a place where impossible things might start to stir. Clara Hughes stood at the base of the grand staircase, arms folded tight over her starched apron. The lamplight threw hard shadows across her face, sharpening the disapproval already there. She had watched from the hall as Devon slipped back from Victoria's room, a daisy petal still clinging to his sleeve. "Darius!" she called, voice clipped. He looked up from the broom, sensing trouble. "Evening, Miss Hughes." She descended 2 steps, gaze fixed on the boy. "Your son's wandering where staff don't belong." Devon froze, fingers curling behind his back. Darius set the broom aside, calm but wary. "He meant no harm, just got curious." Clara's lips thinned. Curiosity can ruin a steady job. Mrs. Stone has been through enough without a janitor's child playing saint in her bedroom. The words hung heavy, too sharp for a quiet corridor. Darius caught Devon's eyes, a silent stay still. Then he faced Clara. "We keep to our lane, always have. I'll handle him." Clara stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper edged with steel. "I've seen men like you lose everything for less. Rich folks might smile, but they don't forget lines crossed. That boy," she pointed toward Devon, "could cost you the roof over your head." Devon straightened, small shoulders squared. "I only gave her a flower," he said, soft but unflinching. Clara's brows shot up at his boldness. "That's how trouble starts, child. A flower, then whispers, then scandal." Darius slipped an arm behind Devon, steady but firm. "Thank you for your concern, Ms. Hughes. I'll talk to him." Clara lingered a moment longer, measuring them both, then turned on her heel, heels clicking against marble. As she disappeared into the service wing, Devon exhaled slowly. The boy's eyes still held a spark, but the storm of adult warnings had found its first target. Darius found Victoria in the library, the fire casting copper light across leather chairs and shelves of unread books. Devon stood a few feet behind him, hands tucked deep into his hoodie. "Ma'am," Darius began, hat in hand, "I owe you an apology. My boy shouldn't have been anywhere near your private rooms." Victoria closed the ledger on her lap, studying the man in front of her. His uniform was plain, dark slacks, pressed shirt. But there was a quiet polish to the way he stood. Not defensive, not meek. Steady, like someone raised to hold his ground even when the floor shook. "He came with a flower," she said evenly. "Not a knife." Darius glanced at Devon, then back at her. "That's true. But I don't want anyone thinking we take advantage. My son knows better. At least he's supposed to." Devon's voice piped up, small but firm. "I wasn't trying to make trouble, Dad." Victoria's brow lifted, curiosity slipping through her usual restraint. "Seems he wanted to offer something I couldn't buy," she said. "That's rare in this house." Darius shifted, uneasy under her gaze, yet unwilling to shrink. "If it caused any offense, I'll see we're gone before morning." A gust outside rattled the windows, spraying snow against the glass. Victoria's eyes flicked to the storm, then back to the pair framed in her firelight. "You'll do no such thing," she said, voice low but decisive. "Weather's set to lock these gates by midnight. Stay put till morning, both of you." Darius hesitated, then nodded once, a quiet thanks lodged in his throat. Devon's shoulders eased, and for a moment the library felt less like a fortress and more like common ground, fragile but real, waiting to see what they would build or break next. Out by the service gate, 2 security guards huddled against the wind, collars up, breath fogging in the floodlights. One jerked his chin toward the mansion windows, where the silhouettes of Victoria, Darius, and Devon glowed faintly against the storm. "Look at that," the older guard muttered. "Janitor waltzes in with his kid, and she invites him to stay. Since when does Stone open her doors like that?" His partner snorted. "Must be some hustle. Folks don't let help sit fireside unless there's an angle." A sleek SUV slowed near the gate, tires crunching snow. Inside, a neighbor in a fur collar rolled down her window, just enough for the words to slip out. "Stone's lost her mind," she drawled, "letting a mop man and his boy crawl up on her mercy. What's next? Giving them the deed?" The guards laughed uneasily, eyes sliding away when they spotted Darius coming out to grab another bucket of salt. He caught the tail end of their smirks, read the script behind their silence. He said nothing, just squared his shoulders, nodding once before heading back inside. But the air around the estate had changed, sharp with a prejudice dressed as gossip, warning that kindness here carried a price. Morning light spilled through the tall windows, soft but cold against the polished oak table. Devon sat perched on the edge of a chair, small hands folded over a plate of toast Victoria had insisted he take. A children's book lay open beside him, bright colors out of place among silverware and porcelain. Across the table, Clara Hughes poured coffee with the poise of someone who'd served the Stones for decades, but her eyes, sharp, appraising, never left the boy. "Quite the guest list this morning," she said, tone sugar over steel. Victoria sipped her tea, unhurried. "Devon kept me company during the storm," she replied. "He's earned a quiet breakfast." Clara's lips thinned. "Company, ma'am, can turn into expectation." Devon glanced at his father at the far end of the room. Darius was polishing a brass rail, jaw tight, pretending not to hear. Victoria set her cup down, gaze steady. "He's 7, Clara. He's not drafting invoices." The housekeeper hesitated, but her disapproval clung to the air like static. "Boundaries protect everyone, Mrs. Stone." Devon lowered his eyes, tracing the edge of the page. "I don't need protecting," he said quietly. "Just breakfast." Victoria felt a flick of heat under her ribs. The boy's calm cut through the mansion's usual hush. She reached over, turning the book so he could see the illustrations better. "Finish your story," she said. "After that, maybe you can read to me." Clara's brows rose, a silent protest. But Victoria held her gaze until the older woman turned away, stiff-backed, and busied herself with the dishes. The snow outside had begun to melt, but inside the dining room, tension clung like frost to glass, delicate, waiting for the next crack. Victoria sat in her armchair near the library window, snowlight sliding in pale stripes across the rug. Devon sprawled on the floor with a slim picture book, voice rising and falling as he read aloud. "And the little train kept climbing, even when folks said it couldn't," he recited, eyes darting up to see if she was listening. "I think I've met that train," she murmured, half-smile cutting through her usual reserve. He shifted closer, laying the book on her lap. "My grandma back home used to say stories carry medicine," he said. "They make hurt places softer." Victoria traced the bold drawings with one hand. "Medicine, huh?" Devon hesitated, then placed his palm gently over the blanket draped across her legs. "Sometimes you just need somebody to believe you can move." Warmth pressed through the cashmere. Victoria blinked. There, faint but sure, a tingle traveled from where his fingers rested up toward her hip. She froze, breath caught in her throat. "That's odd," she whispered. "Not odd," Devon replied quietly. "Just starting." He looked at her the way elders look at a hymn that never lost its power. The mansion's stillness wrapped around them, but under it a fragile pulse stirred, like the first line of a gospel breaking a Sunday silence, daring every doubt to stay seated. A heavy knock rolled through the foyer, shaking the calm they'd built over breakfast. Clara hurried to the door, smoothing her apron before swinging it open. A rush of icy wind swept in, and with it, Evelyn Stone. She stood framed by the storm, a tall woman wrapped in mink, silver hair coiled like steel around her face. Her gaze slid past Clara and landed on the library beyond, where Victoria sat with Devon crouched near her chair and Darius polishing the brass railing. Evelyn's lips curled. "What circus is this?" The room stiffened. Devon froze, one hand still resting on Victoria's blanket. Darius straightened slowly, cloth in hand. "Good morning, Mother," Victoria said, voice even but cool. "You arrived early." "I was worried," Evelyn replied, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "Worried enough to drive through a snowstorm and find this." She gestured toward Darius and Devon. "Strays in your parlor while you play patient saint." Darius met her eyes, steady but respectful. "Ma'am, I'm just here doing my job." "And your boy?" Evelyn's tone snapped like frost. Victoria's wheelchair clicked as she spun toward her mother. "He's a guest." "My guest." Evelyn let out a sharp laugh, all pearl and venom. "Guests, or projects to soothe your guilt?" Devon shifted, gaze flicking from Evelyn back to Victoria, unsure if he should speak. Victoria's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Mother." For a moment, silence burned hotter than the fire. Evelyn's stare swept the room, lingering on the boy, then on Darius's calm face. Snow hissed against the window, a quiet witness as old money and quiet dignity squared off, the air crackling with the promise of another storm. This one inside. Darius waited until Evelyn's heels clicked out of earshot, then crossed the library to stand near Victoria's chair. Devon sat quietly on the rug, tracing circles in the nap with one finger, sensing the grown-up storm still hanging in the air. "Ma'am," Darius said, low but steady, "I need to clear the air before this turns into something ugly." Victoria tilted her head, studying him. "Go on." He clasped his hands behind his back, the way his father once did before speaking to a pastor or judge. "I'm grateful for your kindness last night. You didn't have to let us stay while the snow came down." His eyes flicked briefly toward Devon. "But I also know how fast people talk when they see a janitor's boy sitting next to money." Victoria's mouth tightened. She'd heard the whispers, too. "So here's my offer," he continued. "If you want Devon to stay close, help with your reading, keep that spark you noticed, I won't stand in the way. But I'll tend your garden, clear the paths, whatever extra chores need doing. And I'll make sure nobody outside these walls hears one word about your health or anything else." Her brows rose, intrigued. "You're bargaining with me?" "I'm protecting my son," he said plainly. "And I figure you don't need more people judging how you run your house." Devon looked up then, hopeful but wary. Victoria leaned back, fingertips resting on the wheel rims. She saw no groveling in the man before her, only quiet resolve, the same steadiness she once admired in business partners who'd fought their way up from nothing. "Very well, Mr. Cole," she said at last. "You tend the grounds, and your boy may visit the library. On one condition, he stays out of my room unless invited." Darius inclined his head. "Fair." For a moment the three of them shared the same fragile silence, like a contract signed without ink, stitched together by trust and the thin thread of a snowbound morning. Dr. Patel adjusted her glasses, penlight flashing across Victoria's knees as she worked through a quiet set of reflex tests. The library smelled faintly of polish and snowmelt, Darius standing just inside the door while Devon hovered by a stack of encyclopedias, clutching the daisy stem he'd rescued from the windowsill. "Breathe, Victoria," the doctor said gently. "Let's see what your body has to say today." Victoria steadied her hands on the armrests. She felt the probe brush her calf. Then, almost imperceptibly, a ripple moved up through the muscle. Not pain, but a live wire where there had been stone. Patel paused, eyebrow lifting a fraction. "Interesting." "What?" Victoria asked, voice tight. "A faint response," the doctor replied, pressing again. "Not enough to shout miracle, but more than I expected." Devon's face lit, but Patel's tone cooled. "Could be placebo. Sometimes when a patient believes strongly, the brain tricks the body. Victoria bristled. I don't exactly buy fairy tales, doctor. Patel glanced at Darius, who met her look without flinching. Placebo or not, if she's getting signals, we monitor. But I need to know, have either of you changed her meds? Therapy schedule? Darius shook his head. Ma'am, I don't touch what isn't mine. Patel nodded slowly, scribbling in her pad. Then we keep quiet, stay observant. No headlines, no gossip. If there's something real here, we let science confirm it. Her words hung between them, sober but edged with curiosity. Outside, the storm eased into sunlight, thin and tentative, like the first trace of strength inside Victoria's legs, waiting to see if anyone believed enough to name it. Clara slipped into the butler's pantry once the doctor left, closing the door until only a thin line of light spilled from the hall. She checked the corridor, then pulled a slim phone from her apron pocket. Richard? It's Clara Hughes, she whispered. On the other end, the lawyer's voice carried a smooth confidence. Clara, always a pleasure. What's happening up there? She lowered her voice further, as if the shelves themselves might gossip. You asked me to keep an eye on Mrs. Stone. Well, there's movement. That janitor, Cole, he's getting bold. Brings his boy right into her rooms. Reading to her, sharing cookies, acting like they belong. Cole? Richard's tone sharpened. You're sure? I saw it with my own eyes, she said. He's playing the steady gentleman while the kid makes her soft. It's unsettling. She's letting them sit at her table, stay overnight. Folks in the neighborhood already whisper about impropriety. Richard chuckled darkly. Impropriety sells. If she's compromising herself with staff, the board will want to know. Clara hesitated, guilt flickering. I don't want trouble, but someone has to protect her name. She's too trusting. Send me details, Richard said, smooth as oil. Every visit, every late-night moment. We'll make sure the Stones don't get blindsided. Clara ended the call, sliding the phone back into her pocket. For a moment she stared at the pantry's neat shelves, polished silver, labeled jars. Everything in its proper place. Beyond the door, Devon's laugh drifted faintly from the library, warm and unguarded. Clara set her jaw. Order had to be kept, even if it meant turning a kindness into ammunition. By the end of the week, whispers had escaped the Stone estate and taken on a life of their own. First it was a shaky photo, Victoria by the window, Devon crouched at her feet, Darius holding a rake in the background. Someone from the gate staff had snapped it and passed it along. A blogger posted it with a headline, Janitor's Kid Heals Tycoon. Sources say Stone can feel her legs. Within hours, it spread across neighborhood group chats, then jumped to a city forum. On Black Twitter, folks debated whether the story was heartwarming or a setup. Look at that boy, blessing her like he's in Sunday school, one woman wrote, sharing a gif of a gospel choir. Another warned, watch how they'll use that child if money's involved. Talk radio picked it up next. A host laughed. Miracles in mansions sounds like a Netflix pitch. Callers chimed in, split between curiosity and suspicion. Even church elders in Darius's old neighborhood called to ask if he was keeping it righteous up there in the big house. Meanwhile, tabloids ran captions under blurry images. From mop to miracle worker? Inside the mansion, Victoria scrolled through headlines on her tablet, face unreadable. Darius stood nearby, shoulders tight. People love a story they don't understand, he said quietly. Devon peeked over the arm of her chair, frowning. Did I do something wrong? Victoria closed the tablet and looked at them both. No, she said, voice steady. You did something human. The world just doesn't know what to call it yet. But even as she spoke, the sense of calm felt fragile, a surface barely hiding the undertow gathering strength outside their walls. Evelyn's heels struck the marble like a metronome of judgment as she strode into the sunroom. Morning light caught the frost in her hair and the tension in her jaw. Victoria sat near the window, tablet on her lap, Devon quietly sketching in a corner, while Darius polished the brass frame of a chaise. Enough, Evelyn announced, voice cutting through the hush. I've read the gossip, seen the headlines. Janitor's child heals the tycoon. Do you know what people are saying about you? Victoria set the tablet aside, tone calm but wary. They're saying what they always say. Whatever gets clicks. This isn't just talk, Evelyn pressed, pacing. Board members are calling. Reporters sniffing around. They think you've lost judgment, letting a staff man's son play prophet in your house. Devon's pencil stilled. Darius straightened, cloth in hand, but kept quiet. Evelyn turned on him. Mr. Cole, you seem decent, but this, she gestured between Devon and Victoria, has gone too far. For everyone's sake, take your boy and go before this becomes ruinous. Victoria's fingers tightened on the armrest. Mother. I'm protecting you, Evelyn insisted. Scandal doesn't care about intent. It swallows reputations, fortunes. She leaned closer, voice dropping. And it always eats the black family first. Darius finally spoke, measured and firm. Ma'am, we've never asked for anything but an honest day's work. Devon brought a flower, not a scheme. Evelyn's gaze snapped back to Victoria. You've built a life from discipline. Don't throw it away for sentiment. Victoria met her mother's eyes, conflict flickering across her face. The boy's drawing lay on the floor, a clumsy sketch of a woman standing, sunlight behind her. She felt the weight of the world on one side, a fragile hope on the other, and knew the next words could redraw every line between them. Moonlight poured over the stone estate like silver ink, pooling in the walled garden beyond the library. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and sharp, every branch haloed with frost. Victoria rolled her chair onto the flagstone path, Devon padding beside her in his socks, clutching a tiny flashlight. Your mother would lock both of us in the cellar if she knew, Victoria murmured, lips curved despite herself. Devon grinned, teeth flashing in the dark. Good thing she's asleep. He pointed to the snow-dusted flower beds. That's where I hid your daisy from the wind. They stopped near a stone bench. Victoria felt the quiet settle, heavy but oddly alive, the way her husband used to describe the seconds before a jazz solo. Devon crouched, brushing snow off her lap blanket. Try now, he whispered. Think about moving your foot, like you used to tap to music. Victoria hesitated, then closed her eyes. She pictured the rhythm of old dance floors, Marcus spinning her under soft lights. Slowly she pushed thought into muscle. A faint tremor stirred in her ankle. Her eyes snapped open. There, did you see? Devon's smile widened, pure as a hymn. Told you, he said, breath fogging in the cold. But beyond the hedges, a shadow flickered, a guard making rounds or something else. The boy's grin dimmed for a heartbeat. Victoria caught the glance, sensing the risk. Miracles were fragile things, especially when the world outside was waiting to crush anything it couldn't explain. Still, for that moment, under a bruised blue sky, they stayed, two conspirators guarding the first spark of freedom. Darius paused outside the service pantry, mop bucket in hand, when voices drifted through the cracked door. Clara's tone was low, urgent, the same clipped cadence she used whenever Victoria's name came up. I'm telling you, Richard, the situation's ripe. The janitor's in her library every morning, the boy at her knee. She's letting them play healer while the press salivates. Richard Hale's voice came clear over speakerphone, smooth as lacquer. Exactly the leverage we need. If we file for conservatorship now, we protect her assets and stop this circus before it burns her reputation. Conservatorship? Clara hissed. You think a judge would go that far? Judges eat up stories like this, Richard replied. Disabled heiress, opportunistic help. It writes itself. We get affidavits, maybe from staff, and frame it as emotional manipulation. Darius stiffened, pulse pounding. Clara hesitated. Victoria trusts the man, and the child's harmless. Harmless doesn't matter, Richard said. Optics do. If you care about her legacy, you'll testify that Cole's overstepped, that he and his son are playing on her loneliness. A chair scraped. Darius imagined Clara twisting her apron. I only wanted to keep order, not ruin lives. Then help us clean up, Richard urged. Get proof, photos, texts, anything suggesting intent. Once the petition's filed, the court will freeze her accounts, restrict access. They'll both be out before they know what happened. Darius's knuckles whitened around the mop handle. Clara sighed. All right, I'll see what I can gather. But this stays between us. Of course, Richard said silkily. By the time they realize, it'll be too late. Footsteps shifted. Darius slipped back, pressing against the shadowed corridor as Clara exited, smoothing her hair like nothing had passed. He waited until her heels faded toward the foyer, then exhaled, chest tight. For years, he'd endured quiet slights, learned how to keep his head down. But this, plotting to paint Devon as a pawn, to brand him a grifter's son, cut deeper than any whisper. He looked toward the library where Victoria sat with Devon, unaware of the snare tightening around them. A resolve settled over him, heavy but clear. If they wanted to call his family trespassers in a house where they'd only brought light, they would have to look him in the eye to do it. Victoria wheeled into the foyer, her movements precise, eyes lit with a fire Clara had never seen. Darius stood near the staircase, one hand steadying Devon against his hip. The boy clutched his drawing pad, wary but unflinching. Clara straightened, smoothing her apron. Mrs. Stone, I was just about to— Save it, Victoria said, voice clear as crystal. I know about the call. I know you spoke with Richard Hale. Color drained from Clara's face. Ma'am, I only meant to protect— Protect who? Victoria cut in, rolling forward until the wheels hummed against the marble. Not me, not this child. She gestured toward Devon. You were ready to put him on trial for existing under my roof. Devon shifted closer to Darius, eyes searching Victoria's face. Clara's hands tightened at her sides. You don't understand how this looks to people. I understand perfectly, Victoria said, voice rising just enough to slice the silence. For 20 years, I've let fear and appearances dictate everything in this house. That ends now. She turned slightly toward Darius and Devon, then back to Clara. This home is safe for him, for both of them, and anyone who thinks otherwise can find the door. Clara blinked, stunned. You'd dismiss me after 30 years? I'd dismiss anyone, Victoria replied evenly, who thinks loyalty means feeding poison into my walls. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Clara dropped her gaze, lips pressed thin. She untied her apron with stiff fingers, laid it across the banister, and walked out, heels echoing against the tile until the front door closed behind her. Victoria looked at Devon, then Darius. You belong here tonight, she said softly, but the words carried steel. Devon's shoulders eased, a shy smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Darius met Victoria's eyes, silent gratitude mixing with the weight of new responsibility. Outside, the winter wind howled. Inside, for the first time, the mansion felt less like a fortress and more like ground claimed, steady, warm, and fiercely defended. Victoria gripped the polished bars of the therapy frame, breath fogging in the cool of the unused gym. Morning light streamed through high windows, catching dust motes that floated like tiny sparks. Darius stood close, hands hovering at her waist, while Devon knelt nearby, sneakers squeaking softly on the floor. You don't have to prove anything, Darius said, steady but watchful. I'm not proving, Victoria replied, eyes fixed forward. I'm living. She pushed against the wheels, sliding her feet until they rested flat on the mat. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then her right thigh twitched, a tremor barely visible beneath the tailored slacks. Devon gasped, small fist pressed to his mouth. Victoria shifted her weight, testing the other leg. The muscles answered, weak but real. She rose an inch, two, the frame catching her elbows. For a moment she stood, wobbly, fragile, but standing. A laugh, surprised and bright, burst out of her. Look at that. But the strength faltered as quickly as it came. Her knee buckled. She sank back into the chair with a soft grunt. Darius caught the armrest before she could slide, steadying her. Easy, he said, voice low. Victoria leaned back, breathless but grinning. That was worth it. Devon scrambled up, eyes wide. You did it! You really did it! Darius met Victoria's gaze over the boy's head. He saw something in her expression, courage stitched with stubborn hope, and felt it catch inside him like an ember. Maybe this wasn't just a child's dream or a doctor's fluke. Outside, wind rattled the branches, but inside the gym a quiet warmth settled, fragile yet undeniable, a promise that the story wasn't over, that the climb had just begun. A cold rain slicked the courthouse steps as Richard Hale swept inside, coat collar turned up against the wind. Upstairs, a private conference room waited, mahogany table, brass lamp, a single folder lying open like bait. Evelyn Stone stood at the window, pearls tight against her throat, watching umbrellas blur past on the sidewalk below. Richard slid the folder across the table. Emergency petition. All it needs is your signature. Evelyn turned, face set in lines of worry and pride. You're certain this is necessary? I'm certain the situation's spiraling, Richard said smoothly. The press already smells blood. Janitor's child works miracle. Heiress under spell. If we don't step in, she risks everything. Her estate, her credibility, her safety. Evelyn glanced at the pages. Request for immediate protective oversight. Alleged exploitation of a disabled adult. Legal phrases stacked like bricks around her daughter's name. She'll hate me, Evelyn whispered. She'll thank you when it's over, Richard replied. This isn't about feelings. It's about shielding her from people who see an open door and rush to take. Evelyn hesitated, remembering Victoria's laughter in the garden, the quiet steadiness of Darius holding the boy's coat, but she also remembered the photo on every feed, strangers dissecting her family's name. Richard leaned closer. Sign, and the court freezes access, orders an investigation. We'll prove the janitor meant no harm, or expose him if he did. Either way, your daughter is protected. Thunder rolled beyond the glass. Evelyn took the pen, fingers trembling just enough to leave a blot of ink on the margin. She signed, then watched Richard add his own flourish, sealing the alliance. File it today, she said, voice clipped. Richard nodded, tucking the papers into his leather briefcase. By tonight, deputies will serve notice at the house. Cole won't see it coming. Downstairs, rain hammered the stone steps as Richard disappeared into the storm. Evelyn lingered a moment longer, eyes closing against the ache in her chest. She told herself this was love dressed as duty, yet somewhere underneath, doubt stirred, thin, persistent, and cold as the rain sliding against the glass. The fire snapped softly in the great room, throwing amber light across the stone hearth. Outside, rain had turned to sleet, tapping against the windows like a restless messenger. Darius sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, while Victoria rested in her chair across from him. A knitted throw draped over her lap. Devon had fallen asleep on the rug between them, curled up with his sketchbook clutched tight to his chest. Darius watched the boy's slow breathing, the rise and fall like a fragile metronome. He shouldn't have to carry this, he murmured, voice rough. A kid his age ought to be thinking about kickball, not whether folks hate him for who he is. Victoria gazed into the fire, eyes reflecting its flicker. I let too many things rule this house. Appearances, board members, my own shame. I won't add their fear to that list. He lifted his head, studying her profile. You sure about standing with us? They're already circling with papers and cameras. I've spent 2 decades sitting in shadows, she said quietly. If I let them frighten him off now, I teach him that kindness gets punished. She turned, meeting his gaze. And I won't teach that lesson. Darius leaned back, exhaling slow. Where I grew up, he said, we learned to duck trouble. Survive first, speak later. But Devon, he's got something bigger in him. He deserves to walk through a door without thinking it might slam. For a moment, only the fire spoke, crackling like punctuation. Then Victoria reached across the small space between chair and sofa, palm open. Darius hesitated, then placed his hand in hers, calloused and warm against cool skin. No fear, she said, steady as a vow. Not for him, Not in this house. Darius nodded, eyes steady. The sleet beat harder against the panes, but inside, resolve settled like mortar, binding a quiet promise that whatever storm waited beyond the walls, they would teach Devon courage, not retreat. The fire snapped softly in the great room, throwing amber light across the stone hearth. Outside, rain had turned to sleet, tapping against the windows like a restless messenger. Darius sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, while Victoria rested in her chair across from him, a knitted throw draped over her lap. Devon had fallen asleep on the rug between them, curled up with his sketchbook clutched tight to his chest. Darius watched the boy's slow breathing, the rise and fall like a fragile metronome. "He shouldn't have to carry this," he murmured, voice rough. "A kid his age ought to be thinking about kickball, not whether folks hate him for who he is." Victoria gazed into the fire, eyes reflecting its flicker. "I let too many things rule this house. Appearances, board members, my own shame. I won't add their fear to that list." He lifted his head, studying her profile. "You sure about standing with us? They're already circling with papers and cameras." "I've spent 2 decades sitting in shadows," she said quietly. "If I let them frighten him off now, I teach him that kindness gets punished." She turned, meeting his gaze. "And I won't teach that lesson." Darius leaned back, exhaling slow. "Where I grew up," he said, "we learned to duck trouble. Survive first, speak later. But Devon, he's got something bigger in him. He deserves to walk through a door without thinking it might slam." For a moment, only the fire spoke, crackling like punctuation. Then Victoria reached across the small space between chair and sofa, palm open. Darius hesitated, then placed his hand in hers, calloused and warm against cool skin. "No fear," she said, steady as a vow. "Not for him. Not in this house." Darius nodded, eyes steady. The sleet beat harder against the panes, but inside, resolve settled like mortar, binding a quiet promise that whatever storm waited beyond the walls, they would teach Devon courage, not retreat. Morning sunlight spilled across the mansion's library, now transformed into an impromptu clinic. Reporters stood behind a velvet rope, cameras poised, murmuring into microphones. Beside them, a handful of neighbors craned their necks, drawn by curiosity or by the scent of a story. Dr. Patel arranged sensors on Victoria's calves with the precision of a jeweler setting stones. "Electromyography will pick up any voluntary signal," she explained, voice even but pitched for the crowd. 2 colleagues from the university adjusted laptops, their screens blooming with jagged lines. Victoria sat tall, hands folded on her lap. Devon hovered at her side, clutching a small daisy he'd rescued from the garden, its petals bruised but stubborn. Darius kept a quiet watch near the doorway, jaw set, as if daring anyone to speak against them. Patel nodded to Victoria. "When I say go, imagine moving your right foot." The room hushed. Even the radiator seemed to still. "Go." Victoria's brow furrowed. A tremor passed through her thigh. On the monitor, a slim spike rose, then steadied. A clear signal. A ripple ran through the reporters. "Again," Patel instructed. Victoria tried the left. Another spike, higher this time. Devon's breath caught. "She's doing it," he blurted, then clamped a hand over his mouth. Patel allowed herself the smallest smile before schooling her features. "There is measurable activity," she said, turning to the press. "Her motor pathways are firing, weak but real." A reporter raised a hand. "Doctor, can you explain how this is possible after 20 years of paralysis?" Patel hesitated, glancing at the data. "Neurology has limits," she admitted. "We see recovery, but no conventional therapy accounts for the timeline." Another voice, skeptical, sharp. "Are you saying the janitor's son is some kind of healer?" Patel's gaze swept the room. "I'm saying the human body sometimes responds to faith, connection, persistence, things science struggles to quantify. But these results are genuine." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Surprise, doubt, reluctant respect. Outside, someone honked a horn in the street, as if punctuating the moment. Darius stepped forward slightly, resting a steadying hand on Devon's shoulder. The boy's eyes never left the monitor, where tiny lines kept proving what the world wasn't ready to name. Victoria let out a breath, part relief, part defiance. For the first time, the story didn't belong to gossip or to fear. It was written in numbers and light, witnessed by a room full of people who could no longer pretend it was impossible. The courthouse pulsed with heat despite the gray winter outside. A crowd jammed the benches, reporters, neighbors, strangers hungry for a verdict. Cameras clicked like insects as the bailiff called the room to order. At the defense table, Darius sat ramrod straight, hands folded tight, a quiet storm brewing behind his eyes. Devon leaned against him, small fingers gripping the edge of his father's jacket. Across the aisle, Richard Hale rose with theatrical calm, legal pad in hand, and approached the witness stand where Darius had just been sworn in. "Mr. Cole," Richard began, voice as smooth as varnish, "you claim your only role in Ms. Stone's life is janitorial." He let the word hang, faintly mocking. "Yet you admit your child spends hours in her private quarters, touching her legs, whispering encouragement." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Darius kept his gaze steady. "Devon brings her hope. That's all." "Hope," Richard echoed. He turned to the judge. "Or manipulation? You moved into her home after a single night. Now she funds your lodging, your meals, and you supervise her exercises, without credentials, without oversight." Evelyn flinched in her seat behind Richard, pearls twisting between nervous fingers. Richard pivoted back to Darius. "Isn't it true you stand to gain, financially, socially, if Ms. Stone's story becomes a miracle instead of what it likely is, a fantasy?" "No," Darius said, voice low but firm. "I stand to lose everything if people keep twisting this. My boy wanted her to feel less alone. That's it." Richard advanced a step, eyes gleaming. "You expect this court to believe a 6-year-old accidentally launched a recovery that medicine can't explain?" Devon shifted, about to speak, but Darius placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "He's not on trial," he said evenly. "Neither is her hope." The judge tapped a pen against the bench. "Mr. Hale, keep to questions." Richard smiled thinly, pacing. "Fine. Mr. Cole, will you swear under oath you've never discussed compensation with Ms. Stone?" "I will," Darius replied, steady as granite. "We never asked for a dime." Across the room, Victoria watched from her chair near counsel's table, face calm but eyes alive with fury. She caught her mother's glance, Evelyn's expression caught between guilt and dawning regret. The air thickened, an electric pause before the next blow. In that stillness, Devon's small hand slipped into his father's. Darius didn't look down, but his fingers closed around the boy's, a silent promise that they would weather this storm together, no matter how sharp the questions became. The bailiff lifted a hand toward the small figure near the defense table. "Devon Cole, please take the stand." A hush swept through the room as Devon walked forward, dwarfed by the mahogany walls and the towering judge. He clutched a daisy, its stem slightly bent from the morning's rush, as if it were a shield. Darius followed him with his eyes, lips pressed thin, ready to step in if the world got too heavy for a 6-year-old's shoulders. Devon climbed into the witness chair, legs dangling. The judge leaned forward, gentler than before. "Do you understand you're here to tell the truth, son?" "Yes, sir," Devon said, voice barely above a whisper. Richard Hale approached slowly, smoothing his tie for effect. "Devon, you spend a lot of time with Miss Stone, don't you?" "Yes. And when you're with her, you touch her legs? Encourage her to stand?" Devon frowned, looking down at the flower in his hand. "I don't make her do anything. I just help her remember she's strong." A ripple of surprise moved through the gallery. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Help her? How?" Devon lifted the daisy, eyes clear now. "Flowers make people better than money." The words hung in the courtroom, simple and unpolished, yet heavy enough to tilt the air. Richard hesitated, caught off guard. What do you mean by that? Devon turned toward the jury, small voice steady. Money doesn't smile at you. Flowers do. When somebody's lonely, you don't give them a wallet. You give them something alive, so they know they still matter. The judge's pen stilled. Even Evelyn, rigid on the bench behind Richard, felt her breath catch. Devon swung his feet slowly, thinking. Miss Victoria was sad. Daddy said we should be kind anyway, so I bring her flowers and I talk to her legs, like they can hear kindness too. Victoria's eyes shimmered. Richard cleared his throat, searching for footing. Devon, did anyone tell you to say these things in court today? No, Devon answered, gaze unwavering. I'm saying it 'cause it's true. Silence settled again, no longer tense, but reverent, as if everyone in the room had been handed a mirror to their own heart. Even the court reporter's fingers paused above the keys, unwilling to break the spell of a boy reminding grown-ups what grace could look like. The judge adjusted his glasses, voice carrying through the packed chamber. Ms. Stone, the court has heard testimony and reviewed the medical data. To settle remaining doubts, I'd like you to attempt a brief demonstration, if you feel able. A collective murmur swept the room. Victoria's hands tightened on the arms of her wheelchair. For years, the chair had been her fortress and her prison. Now every eye waited to see if she would dare step beyond it. Dr. Patel rose from the front row, calm but alert. I'll stand by for safety, she said. Victoria nodded once, then looked to Darius and Devon. Devon still clutched his daisy, gaze locked on her as if willing courage across the space. Slowly, Victoria placed both palms on the chair's rails. She inhaled, steadying her breath, then pushed upward. Her legs trembled, unsure, but they bore her weight. The courtroom froze. She shifted 1 foot forward, hesitant, like testing thin ice. Another breath, another step. A faint gasp rippled through the benches as she cleared the chair completely. Take your time, Patel murmured. Victoria's back straightened. A third step followed, stronger. Light from the tall windows spilled over her shoulders, catching the quiet awe on every face. Evelyn pressed a hand to her lips, tears brimming. Richard's pen hung motionless over his notes. Devon broke the silence, voice ringing clear. See? I told you she could. The judge allowed a rare smile. Indeed. Victoria stopped halfway to the witness rail, legs quivering but holding. She looked at Darius, steady, proud, and then down at Devon, who lifted the daisy like a banner. She laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief and triumph. I'm still standing, she said, and the words carried farther than her voice, reaching every corner of the room. Applause burst, restrained at first, then rolling like a wave despite the judge's gavel tapping for order. For a moment, the trial, the accusations, the years of doubt, all of it receded, eclipsed by the sight of a woman reclaiming ground once thought lost forever. The courtroom was still humming from Victoria's steps when the judge lifted a hand for quiet. He scanned the gallery, letting the hush settle like dust after a storm. This court has reviewed the petition filed by Mr. Hale and Mrs. Stone, he began, voice steady but edged with finality. We have examined medical evidence, heard expert testimony, and, most compelling, witnessed Ms. Stone's own recovery. Richard shifted uneasily at counsel's table, flipping through papers he no longer needed. Evelyn sat rigid behind him, pearls forgotten in her lap, her gaze fixed on her daughter's upright figure. The judge continued, No proof exists that Mr. Cole or his son acted with malice or sought personal gain. What we do have is a chronicle of resilience. A child who offered kindness, a man who protected his boy, and a woman who found strength she believed lost forever. He leaned forward, eyes softening. Sometimes the law meets something larger than itself, the will to rise, the courage to see past suspicion. This is one of those times. Turning toward Victoria, he offered a nod almost paternal. Ms. Stone, this court commends your determination. And to young Devon Cole, your belief in healing has reminded every adult here of what faith looks like. A ripple of warmth spread across the benches. A reporter dabbed at her eyes. A deputy smiled behind a stony face. The petition is dismissed, the judge concluded. Ms. Stone retains full control of her estate and medical decisions. Mr. Cole and his son are free of any allegation. He rapped the gavel once, sharp and clear. Applause broke loose despite protocol, rising from the back row where community elders had gathered. Evelyn stood slowly, meeting Darius's gaze, an unspoken apology hovering there. Victoria reached for Devon's hand, steady now. He placed the daisy against her palm, its petals bright against the polished wood. In that moment, the court wasn't merely a room of rulings and paperwork. It was a place where dignity had survived rumor, where a boy's simple gift had tipped the balance toward grace. By the next morning, the story had leapt far beyond the courthouse walls. Headlines blazed across local papers. Boy's faith, woman's strength, defeat prejudice in court. On social media, a single clip, Devon handing Victoria the daisy after the verdict, spread like a spark in dry grass. Hashtags bloomed. Hashtag Devon's daisy. Hashtag rise Victoria. Hashtag faith against fear. Under each, thousands of voices weighed in, many from black churches and community groups that had followed the trial with quiet prayer. At St. Mark's Baptist, Reverend Ellis filmed a short message, his Bible resting on a worn pulpit. That child reminded us, he said, that hope is a holy act. We stand with the Coles and Ms. Stone. Similar videos poured in from Detroit to Birmingham, choirs singing snatches of Lean on Me, ushers waving banners with Devon's name written in careful script. A coalition of black-owned businesses launched a small fund for youth mentorship, citing Devon as inspiration. Letters arrived at the mansion, handwritten from elders, printed from school children. One note, penned in looping cursive, read, "You made us proud. Don't let them steal your shine." Darius stood in the foyer with an armful of envelopes, marveling at the weight of support. "Never thought folks this far out would even know our names," he murmured. Victoria, balanced on crutches now, scanned a tablet showing the growing wave. "They don't just know," she said. "They're claiming you as their own." Devon peeked over her elbow, grinning at a photo of Sunday school kids holding daisies outside a brick church. "Can we go meet them?" he asked. Darius chuckled, rough but warm. "One day, little man. Right now, we write back." For a household once besieged by doubt, the tide had turned. Proof that solidarity, once awakened, could travel farther than malice ever hoped. Spring light slanted through the study windows as Victoria leaned over a spread of papers, her crutches propped nearby. Darius stood beside her, scanning the neat rows of figures and mission statements. Devon sat cross-legged on the rug, crayons scattered around a sketch of daisies and open doors. Victoria tapped a page with her pen. "Here," she said, voice clear. "The Colestone Fellowship. Seed money from my estate. Stewardship shared between us. Scholarships for black children with gifts for healing and service. Kids who see beyond brokenness." Darius studied her, jaw set with quiet pride. "That's more than charity," he said. "That's handing them a map we never had." She nodded, eyes warming. "When I was trapped in that chair, I thought legacy meant buildings with my name on them. But what matters is who walks freer because we believed." Devon looked up from his drawing. "Will they get flowers too?" Victoria laughed softly. "Maybe every fellow should plant one." She bent, steadying herself, and touched the daisy on his paper. A reminder that kindness can root anywhere. On the desk, letters from pastors and teachers lay stacked beside a draft press release. Headlines were already circling. "Stone Heiress launches. Fellowship honoring Janitor's son." Darius placed a hand over hers, grounding the moment. "This isn't just your win," he said. "It's a door for a lot of kids who've been told to stay small." Victoria held his gaze, then looked at Devon, whose grin carried the fearless light that had first broken her isolation. "Let's make sure they never doubt their worth," she said. Outside, wind stirred the garden where new daisies grew, living proof that a boy's gesture and a woman's risk had become something larger, a future stitched with courage, ready for others to claim. The Stone Estate's garden had never seen such a gathering. Lanterns hung from magnolia branches, dappling the new grass with gold, long tables brimmed with barbecue, cornbread, and sweet tea, Victoria's nod to the black neighbors who'd sent letters of support, choir singers from St. Mark's warmed up near the hedge, their laughter weaving through the spring air. Devon darted between guests, handing out fresh daisies from a wicker basket. Darius kept a watchful but relaxed eye, greeting folks with a firm handshake or a nod of thanks. For once, the lawn wasn't divided between staff and society. It felt like a single crowd, learning how to breathe together. Evelyn Stone approached slowly, pearls gleaming against her navy jacket. She stopped a few feet from Devon, who was showing his sketchbook to a pair of church elders. Clearing her throat, she said, "Devon." He turned, wary at first, then offered a small smile. Evelyn crouched carefully, knees stiff. "I owe you an apology," she said, voice hushed but steady. "I let fear speak louder than truth. From today on, I intend to protect the light you carry." Devon glanced at Darius, who gave a subtle nod. "Okay," the boy replied, placing a daisy in her hand. "Everybody deserves another chance." Tears shimmered in Evelyn's eyes as she rose, clutching the flower. Victoria, balanced on her crutches, raised a glass of lemonade. "To second chances," she called, her tone bright and sure. "To bridges built when we dare to listen." A ripple of applause followed, joined by the choir's first soft chord. Darius slipped an arm around Devon's shoulders. Together they watched laughter and music fold across the garden, proof that the walls which once hemmed them in were finally giving way to open sky. Late sunlight poured across the garden, turning the fresh daisies into little suns against dark soil. Darius knelt at the edge of a new flower bed, guiding Devon's small hands as they pressed roots gently into the earth. "Don't pack it too tight," he said, voice low and steady. "Give it room to breathe, same as folks." Devon grinned, brushing dirt from his palms. "Will they grow fast?" "They'll grow honest," Darius replied, eyes soft. "That's better." A few yards away, Victoria rolled her chair across the flagstones, the wheels crunching softly. She paused by the hedge, soaking in the easy rhythm. A father teaching, a boy laughing, blossoms swaying in the breeze. Slowly, she set the brakes, placed her crutches on the stone, and rose. Her legs wobbled at first, then steadied. She took 3 steps toward them, unhurried, face lit by the orange wash of dusk. Devon spotted her and broke into applause. "Look, Dad, she's doing it without help." Victoria laughed, the sound mingling with the quiet evening hum. "Not without help," she said. "With a whole team." Darius looked up, sunlight catching the silver in his hair. "We built this together," he said. She nodded, gaze sweeping the yard, the fellowship papers drying on the porch table, neighbors still lingering by the gate, Evelyn speaking with church elders. All pieces of a fragile, necessary alliance, money, heart, and steady hands learning how to share one future. Victoria took another careful step, planted herself beside the flower bed, and reached for a trowel. "Let's finish this row," she said, smiling at both father and son. And as twilight settled, the 3 of them bent to their work, planting not just flowers but a promise that courage and kindness, joined, could outlast any storm. As the sun slipped behind the trees, the last petals caught the light, small beacons against the cooling sky. Their quiet work in the garden wasn't just an ending, it was the start of something larger, proof that even after storms, new roots can take hold. If this story stirred something in you, let it keep growing. Share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness and courage still change lives. Drop your thoughts below. Your words might be the spark that keeps another heart steady. And if you want more stories where resilience rises above prejudice, where hope is carved out of hard places, stay close. Hit like, tap subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next voice waiting to be heard. Each view, each comment, each share helps us reach more people searching for proof that faith in each other still matters. Together, we can plant more than flowers. We can plant chances, for kids like Devon, for families like Darius's, for every neighbor ready to stand tall. Thank you for watching, for believing, and for carrying this light a little further down the road.